Welcome to the Wise Doula Podcast, a place for informative, uplifting, and educational conversations. Here, we will discuss all things connected with parenting, from conception to birth, postpartum, and beyond. You are amongst friends here, so go ahead and grab a cup of your favorite drink. Remember, not caffeinated if you are expecting, and join me inside. I can't wait to speak with you. Hello, and welcome to this week's episode. Hey, if I say the word violence, do you know what it means? Can you think of instances where you have witnessed violence? I'm sure everybody can. Whether it's been on TV or in person, we have all witnessed and understood violence, unfortunately. What about if I throw a qualifier in there and I say obstetric violence? Do you know what obstetric violence is? Does it ring a bell? Have you heard of it before, or is it the first time? A little later in the episode, I am going to give you the definition of obstetric violence. But I want to start with a story. I want to start with the story of a pregnant client that I spoke with recently. And as we were talking about preparations for her second birth, I asked how her first birth went. Her first birth was not in the US, it was in a different country. But regardless of where it was, her first birth was an experience of obstetric violence. And when we hear these stories, we might think they're right out of a horror movie, but they do happen. So what happened in this mom's case? What happened to her? What happened is that when she was giving birth and she was in pain, they were yelling at her. Okay, there were multiple people, multiple healthcare professionals coming and doing pelvic exams without asking for authorization. A doctor just came in and this is the way she described it to me, put her hand all the way inside of me and separated my membranes to start the birth. And I did not authorize it. The girl next to her that was also in labor and crying, this professional said to her, "Why are you crying? If you didn't want to have a baby, you shouldn't have had so much fun making one. If you are crying, you're not letting us do our job. So you need to stop crying." Holding her legs open, treating her with despair, treating her with negative comments. And these are a few examples of what obstetric violence is. If you think about the moment of birth, when you are the most vulnerable and raw and at a very primal moment in your life, and somebody is telling you not to cry, is treating you wrong, is doing things that are feeling invasive to you, and you feel that you have no say-so. Because remember, when we are in a situation of sitting in a hospital bed with a gown and in labor and etc., we are immersed in that situation and we are at our most vulnerable. So this mom tells me that all these things happened to her, and now she hopes for a better second birth, and she's going to a hospital where her sister gave birth, and she had a really good experience. And I am praying for her that this experience will be much better than the first one. A lot of people, when you talk about obstetric violence, they think it's an old wives' tale, maybe a legend. It's not. It's not a legend. It exists. Unfortunately, these horrible comments and horrible behaviors exist. And you might think, well, that's impossible because those professionals chose a health path, a career path to help people. True. But at the end of the day, they are human beings too. Sometimes they get stressed out. Sometimes they're used to doing things a certain way and they don't like anybody that goes against a certain way. Sometimes things are very systematic. And when this happens, that happens. When this happens, that happens. So it is very possible that it happens. I'm going to read you the actual definition of obstetric violence. Obstetric violence is an act by a healthcare worker that harms a pregnant person, a person giving birth, or a person who has just recently given birth. Any harm caused in the context of pregnancy care. Okay, that is obstetric violence. Now, if you've been following my podcast for a while, you might remember that in episode 9, I had Dr. Nathan Riley, board certified OBGYN, and he mentioned during that episode, and of course, go back to it and listen to the whole thing because it was amazing. He mentioned that the experience of trauma and obstetric violence can vary from woman to woman. Why? Because what feels like trauma to one person might not feel like trauma to another person. Okay? So for somebody that already has traumatic experiences in their life, a tone of voice that is aggressive, that is condescending, that is patronizing, it's going to land very differently that to somebody that is completely okay with a different tone of voice, completely okay. Some people are able to just brush it off, right? Oh, well, whatever. But that's not always the case. And like I said, this is your most vulnerable moment. When this client was talking about it, I could see it in her face. The memories of that experience, they were not pleasant ones. And even though her son was sitting there, 12 years old, perfectly healthy, she didn't forget. She said, it's been 12 years, but I still remember. So I want to put that on the table because I think it's an experience that happens to a lot of moms, to a lot of dads. And sometimes we don't know how to deal with it. Okay. And so today we're going to talk about a few tools that can help deal with it. But let me get a little deeper in my story. And let me tell you another experience. Yesterday, I was watching a video from a gynecologist showing different sizes of speculums. If you don't know what a speculum is, I, of course, encourage you to Google the definition, but it's a metal tool, and it allows the OBGYN or the midwife to look into the cervix and to do pap smears, etc. It's like two pieces of metal that open like this, and then they're secure in place so the opening remains that way. It was very interesting to see this video with this OBGYN sharing different sizes because obviously there are different sizes of vaginas as well. Not everybody has the same size, right? And it was very interesting to see the sizes. But the most interesting part was the comments. I always read the comments when it's a pelvic exam or pap smear or pelvic ultrasound. I always read the comments because I'm very interested in knowing what the experience of other women has been. And what I read in the comments was, yet again, like another horror movie. People talking about doctors holding them down, telling them to be quiet because they were crying, telling them yelling at them to relax. If you know anything about the uterus and the vagina, it's form of muscles. And when we are tense, those muscles are not going to relax. They're going to contract. That's what muscles do, right? So telling somebody to relax when somebody is very, very tense and tensing up, it's clearly not working. And it really broke my heart. And even though we wouldn't consider that exactly obstetric violence, because those women were not, some of them were in the context of giving birth, some of them were not. Imagine you go to the doctor, you trust this professional, doctor, midwife, nurse practitioner, whatever. You trust this professional, you feel vulnerable, you feel raw, you feel in a way very out in the open in more than one way, right? And you rely on these professionals. And sometimes the result is not what you expected. Of course, there are wonderful medical professionals out there, of course. And in your journey to motherhood, you might have encountered excellent professionals because they are out there. And if that's the case, awesome. But here is my appeal to you to choose really carefully your medical professional, to make sure that you like, feel cared for, feel appreciated, feel nurtured with that professional you chose. Because if you didn't, believe me, it's not going to get better at the point of birth. It's going to get worse. So if you're not satisfied with your medical professional, might be time to look for a different professional that is going to serve you better. And absolutely do not feel guilty about looking for another medical professional. You see, there's this Spanish doctor, philosopher, speaker. He's amazing. Dr. Mario Alonso Puig. And in many of his interviews, I have heard him talk about the optimal patient care. And he talked about how a few words said with love, with caring, with nurturing, before a patient gets rolled into the operating theater can affect significantly the patient's heart rate and the patient's breathing. Just words said in a loving, caring, nurturing tone can have an impact on our heart rate, our respiration, blood pressure, etc. So imagine if words are that powerful, if words can have that much of an impact, positive words, in calming a patient down before they roll into the operating room. Just imagine what negative words can do to a person giving birth, to a mom in the most vulnerable state. Not only the words that they say to you, but the words that you hear them say to somebody else that is giving birth next to you. And this might vary. If you're in a hospital where you're alone in the birthing room, that's one thing. But if you're in a hospital where there are a few people in the birthing room giving birth at the same time, different story, right? Of course, like we said before, we understand that healthcare professionals are also human. Everybody has a bad day. Everybody has stress in their lives. If we think about labor and delivery nurses, they have many patients to take care of. You're not their only patient. So there is a lot of stress that they're under, and there is a lot of pressure that they're under. Still, in spite of that, many nurses and many OBs and many nurse midwives and midwives make it their job to remember that everything starts with love. Everything starts with caring, nurturing, loving, using positive words, using a calm attitude. Now, unfortunately, sometimes we're going to encounter the opposite. Maybe not everybody that is taking care of us during birth, but maybe there is that one nurse or that one doctor that it's like nails on the chalkboard. What tends to happen in my client's experience, what tends to happen when we are experiencing that obstetric violence is that we feel, in a way, perhaps infantilized. We feel like we have to obey and have to do everything they tell us to do. And if they're yelling at us, oh, well, maybe it has to be that way. And if they're telling us it has to be this, and this, well, maybe I'm not supposed to talk. Maybe I'm not supposed to say anything. What a lot of moms say is when you say something, they treat you like you're crazy or like you don't know what you're talking about. Well, if you have done your homework, if you have attended classes or spent time talking to a birth professional before the birth and you are ready for what's going to happen, you are better equipped to have conversations. Never feel that, oh, because I'm the patient and they're the professionals, I can't say peep. No, you can ask questions and you can do lots of things, okay? So let's go to the practical application of what to do if I encounter a situation of obstetric violence, what to do if I am laboring and I am hearing some of these comments like my client heard, right? Don't cry. Why are you crying? You know, pelvic exams without asking for authorization, just going in. Um, you know, don't do this or don't do that, let us do our job, blah, blah, blah. And like I said, and from there it can escalate. I mean, there are many more examples, and I encourage you to look up other examples of obstetric violence. I want to focus on the positives, okay? So let's pray, and hopefully when you are going to give birth, you're going to have an amazing team of professionals and things are going to go smooth. Of course, the possibility of that is huge. But let's say that perhaps you encounter a team or part of a team that is showing some of those signs of obstetric violence, and you are concerned. Well, the time to get ready, let me tell you, is before the birth, okay? So what can you do before the birth? Well, number one, I am always going to insist on prenatal education. And I'm always going to say it's great if the hospital has prenatal classes, but remember that those are intended to be a little more information about how things are going to work at their hospital, which is invaluable, okay? I totally recommend it. But I would say pair those with independent prenatal education classes. Get together with a childbirth educator or doula, such as myself, and ask for the classes that you need. Inquire about classes, figure out if you prefer to go private, one-on-one, or in a group, and get the education and the information you need to have a more empowered birth, you know? Ultimately, you empower yourself with information, with knowledge, etc. Number two, we said number one is prenatal education, both hospital and independent. Number two, I encourage you to find your support person. Of course, I'm always going to advocate for you to get a doula that can be with you during the birth. But if you choose not to hire a doula, make sure your partner or another family member or friend is going to be there to help you advocate for yourself, to help you pause and figure out if things are going the way you would like them to go, or if things are going a little different, what can you do? Okay, so that would be number 2. Number 3, it would be always knowing that you have options. Knowing that you are not just sitting there as a passive being with things being done to you. You always have options. And as long as you approach options from an educated and kind point of view, you can get your message across. So, what does that look like? If there is somebody in the shift that is making you feel very uncomfortable, treating you really terrible, they're really making you feel unsafe, etc., you can very calmly request a different nurse to take care of you. You can very well do that. Number 2, if there are things that are being presented to you, we're going to do this, we're going to do this, we're going to do this. You can always say, okay, I don't understand why we're going to do C. Could you explain to me why we're doing that? And could you explain to me if we have other options? This is where the advocate person in the room that is with you is essential, because in the middle of labor, contractions, feeling uncomfortable, feeling all in your body, you're not going to be necessarily all in your mind, thinking about options and questions. This is where the advocate person that you brought with you can help you facilitate communication, can invite you to reflect, can say, hey, how are you feeling about that thing the doctor just said? Are you cool with that? Would you like us to ask about other options? As doulas, we love to use the acronym B.R.A.I.N for labor and birth decision making. What does B.R.A.I.N stand for? B for benefits, R for risks, A for alternatives, I for intuition, and N for nothing or negotiation. These 5 letters, these 5 words, can guide the conversation with your medical provider during labor. I will include a link to this article in the show notes explaining more in detail about B.R.A.I.N acronym, okay? So you can read more in depth. Ultimately, what is my message with this episode? Well, number 1, I never want my clients to walk into the experience of birth scared, okay? I want them to have all the tools to feel that they are in their power. And that starts when they hire us as doulas. That starts when we go to those prenatal childbirth education classes and we get ready for what's to come, okay? So I encourage you to do part of the work already while you are pregnant. Walk into your birth confidently, knowing that you have the tools and knowing that you have your instinct, that only you knows what's going on in your body intimately. Find that support person that is going to be with you during birth and help you in case any of these situations of violence arise. Is that going to be a doula that you hire? Is that going to be your partner? Is that going to be a relative or friend? I encourage you to put a doula in your life. It will absolutely change your birth experience. But different strokes for different folks. Some people might feel that they want to do it solo. That's okay too. So, very important, prenatal education, getting ready for what's to come. Number 2, advocacy, who's going to be with you, helping you in those conversations. And number 3, communication. Never feel that you're a child that has to, follow blindly everything. Always ask. It's okay to ask. You are an informed, consenting adult, and you want some information before making a decision. That is perfectly healthy and appropriate. Okay? Of course, trust your medical provider. And if the medical provider that you have is not a person that you feel comfortable and safe with, don't wait until the birth. Find a new provider while you're still pregnant. But always, always know that you have tools at your disposal. You have your toolbox where you can put all the elements that make you feel safer, secure, and nurtured at birth. Okay? And of course, don't walk into the birth experience hoping you're going to come away or thinking you're going to come away with horror stories, because you might have a walk in the park, floating on clouds type birth. You might have an amazing team, and your experience might be completely different. But just be prepared for both. And ultimately, I am also speaking to you, mom, dad. If you went through this in your previous birth and you still remember it and it still hurts deep in your heart, because it does, those interactions stay with us. Please make sure to have these discussions with your medical provider. Make sure to tell them that you had a really bad experience with your first birth and that you are worried, concerned, perhaps a bit anxious about this second birth, because our medical providers also need to know what's going on with us. And remember, we're human beings. We're not just a composite of physical parts that open and close and things like that. We are human beings. We're a wonderful garden. And in that garden, we have physical pieces, we have emotional pieces, we have our soul, our spirit. So much goes into birth that is not just the physical aspect. So please have those conversations with your doctor. Please tell them if you're feeling trepidation, if you're feeling turmoil, anxiety, just tell them. Okay? And then work on those parts I mentioned for you. If you have any questions, you know where I am. And before we go, of course, our segment, Birth in the Movies. So this week we have an oldie but a goodie. And this week we are talking about the movie Junior with Arnold Schwarzenegger and Danny DeVito, 1994. This movie is quite interesting. In this movie is Arnold Schwarzenegger that gets pregnant with, they're experimenting with a new drug, etc. It's a comedy. It's a very light story. I really liked in this movie that towards the middle end of the movie, when Arnold Schwarzenegger dresses like a woman to go to this retreat for pregnant moms. And he's feeling a lot of, obviously, trepidation because it's an experiment, etc., etc. Remember, this is 1994. And they sit in a support circle. And all the moms get to put a paper with what they're concerned with in a box, and it's completely anonymous. And then they read the papers, and the director of the center is the one that very lovingly and very nurturing, in a very nurturing way, says, oh, it's so perfectly normal to be worried about being a new mom. And this is actually the paper that his character has put in the box, It's perfectly normal, nobody came with an instruction manual, blah, blah, blah. I really appreciated that nurturing aspect of it, even though the center where he went was very like posh, looked like a golf country club, very posh, very, but they were really very human and very very caring and very nurturing. And I think that's the way to go. I know that's the way to go. And that's how I like to approach all interactions with my clients. And if you ever become my client, one of these days, you will get to enjoy that. But of course, you get to enjoy that on the podcast as well. Well, that has been all for today. Thank you for spending this time with us, and see you next week. Hey, you have listened to the Wise Doula Podcast today. Thank you so much for joining us. Remember, everything we discussed today was meant for entertainment and educational purposes only. It does not substitute the advice of your medical provider. Would you do us a favor? Follow me on Instagram at LovingBellyDoula. Also, let me know what other topics you would like to see me discuss in this podcast. And please subscribe to the podcast on your favorite platforms. Thank you so much. I will see you next week.